Tales from the Odyssey. Chapter 8. Punishment of the Gods. Odysseus woke with a start. He could tell from the morning light that several hours had passed since he had fallen asleep. With a feeling of dread, he leapt from the ground and started running back to his men. As Odysseus neared the cave, his heart sank. The smell of burning meat filled the air. Odysseus was seized with rage and horror. Rushing into the cave, he grabbed the first man he came upon. "What have you done?" he demanded. "Have you disobeyed my orders and defied the gods?" "We were following Eurylochus," the man said. "He told us that starvation was the most terrible of all deaths. He urged us to slay the cattle of the sun god. He said we could appease Helios by building a great temple in his honor when we returned to Ithaca." Odysseus nearly wept with despair. "We were so hungry we could not stop ourselves," the man said. "We killed the best of the cattle and roasted them over the fire." Odysseus cried out in agony. He fell to his knees and called to the gods, "Zeus and all immortal gods, why did you allow me to fall asleep? I begged you to give my men strength and courage. Now they have defied my command and slain the cattle of Helios. Have mercy on us. Have mercy on us all." But Odysseus knew his prayers were in vain. The rage of Helios was surely more powerful than the anguished pleas of a mere mortal. Odysseus imagined that the sun god might threaten never to shine upon the earth again unless the gods helped him take his revenge. Odysseus rose to his feet and looked about the cave. The scene was horrible and unnatural. The hides of the slain cattle crawled across the ground. On the spits, the roasting meat bellowed like living beasts. Odysseus's men cowered before him. As he glared at their terrified faces, the rage drained from his heart. It was so late for rage now. The cattle of Helios were dead, and the men who had slain them would soon die also. Nothing less, Odysseus knew, would appease the sun god's anger. For the next 6 days, as the winds blew harshly outside the cave, Odysseus's men feasted on the sun god's cattle. Finally, on the 7th day, the storm abruptly ceased. At Odysseus's command, the Greeks pulled the ship from its shelter and pushed off into the water. A gentle west wind caught their sail, and they headed once again for the distant shores of Ithaca. For a time it seemed possible that the sun god's rage had been forgotten. But once the black ship had sailed onto the open sea, Odysseus's worst fears were realized. Helios had indeed turned all the other gods against the Greeks, and together the gods took their revenge. First, mighty Zeus sent a black storm cloud across the sky, darkening the waters and turning the day into night. Then Poseidon, god of the seas, sent tumultuous waves crashing over the sides of the ship. Then Aeolus, the wind god, sent a howling wind that blew with such fury that it cracked the ship's mast. The mast and rigging fell on top of the helmsman, crushing his skull. Zeus shook the sky with thunder and hurled down a blazing bolt of lightning. The lightning struck the ship's hull, spinning it around and around on the water. All of Odysseus's men were thrown from the deck into the dark, angry sea. Watching helplessly from the ship, Odysseus saw his men tossed on the waves like seabirds. He watched as, one by one, they sank beneath the water and drowned. Finally, all of Odysseus's men had disappeared under the waves, and Odysseus was completely and terribly alone. Chapter 9. Only Odysseus. Odysseus clung to the lurching ship until the storm began to rip it apart. Then, as the rest of the ship was torn to splinters, he lashed the mast and keel together, making a raft. For hours, Odysseus clung to the raft for dear life as wild winds tossed him over the waves. Darkness soon covered the ocean. As the sea grew calmer, Odysseus feared his raft might be drifting back toward the cave of Scylla and the whirlpool of Charybdis. All through the night he prayed to the gods to spare him from the monsters. But as dawn broke, Odysseus saw Scylla's cliff rising from the sea, and he heard the awful roar of Charybdis. He could feel the black waters of Charybdis's whirlpool begin to pull at his raft. Odysseus' prayers had been in vain. His raft was being sucked into the black, swirling mouth of Charybdis. His body would soon join those of all the other sailors who had drowned in the terrible whirlpool. But just as he was about to be sucked into the monster's mouth, a mighty wave swept Odysseus from his raft. The wave carried him away from the whirlpool, over the sea, onto the shores of Scylla's cliff. Odysseus flung himself from the water and grabbed the trunk of a huge fig tree. He clung to that tree like a bat, holding on with all his strength. He waited for the whirlpool monster to vomit up his raft. Finally, the raft was hurled from the black abyss and sent swirling over the waves. When it was within reach, Odysseus let go of the tree and plunged into the sea. He grabbed the edge of the raft and heaved himself aboard. Then he began rowing madly with his hands. He rowed and rowed. He rowed away from Charybdis. He rowed past the cliff of Scylla. He rowed until he was safe from both dreaded sea monsters. For 9 days and 9 nights, Odysseus drifted on his raft. He had no food and no water. He had no idea where he was going or how he would ever get home. As he drifted over the open ocean, he mourned the loss of all his comrades. He grieved for the family he feared he would never see again. Finally, on the 10th day, the waves tossed Odysseus and his raft onto the shore of a mysterious island. And we'll stop there.